Good afternoon. Thank you for attending the CSI for Dairy On-Farm Audits to Assess Risk webinar presented by Dr. Gustavo Schwinnemann, Extension Veterinarian and Assistant Professor with The Ohio State University. My name is Eric Pulaski. I am the Sustainable Agriculture Educator with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, and I will moderate this evening's presentation. This event is part of a series of educational programs offered by OFA and the OSU Veterinarian Extension to practicing veterinarians, farmers, and animal health professionals who work with certified organic management systems. OFA was founded in 1979 as a grassroots coalition of farmers, backyard gardeners, consumers, retailers, educators, researchers, and others who share a desire to build a healthy food system that brings prosperity to family farmers, meets the growing consumer demand for local food, creates economic opportunities for our rural communities, and safeguards the environment. For more than 35 years, OFA has used education, advocacy, and grassroots organizing to promote local and organic food systems, helping farmers and consumers reconnect and together build a sustainable food system one meal at a time. With an office in every county and celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, the Ohio State University's Extension is the official outreach program of the Ohio State University's College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences, with additional faculty and staff in the College of Education and Human Ecology and the College of Veterinary Medicine. The core of OSU's Extension focuses on 4 areas: enhancing agriculture and the environment, strengthening families and communities, advancing employment and income opportunities, and preparing youth for success. Supporters, alumni, and friends are encouraged to help shape the next 100 years by volunteering and participating in extension programs. Partial funding for this webinar is provided through a grant from the North Central SARE Region Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program of the United States Department of Agriculture. NCR SARE has awarded more than $40 million worth of competitive grants to farmers, ranchers, researchers, educators, public and private institutions, nonprofit groups, and others exploring sustainable agriculture in 12 states. We thank you for this support. The questions this evening will be moderated. If you have a question, please type it into the question box on your screen. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to submit questions or points of clarification as they come to mind. Dr. Schwinnemann will monitor questions and may address them during the presentation, but otherwise, questions will be held into the designated question period. I will now pass it along to Dr. Schwinnemann.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, and I'm assuming that I have people that are in a different time zone. So, and I go through, as far as I can see, there are only just 12 people in, right?
My tally.
So anyway, so here is the CSI for dairy on-farm audit to assess risk as we advertise. And basically this on-farm risk assessment, what I'm going to try to do in my presentation now is to go through the effect of management practices and on calving-related disease in certified organic dairy farms. And just kind of going through those transition from, pre-partum calving and early lactation, and how we manage that will determine the prevalence of specific metabolic and infectious diseases for different for cows. And so here are the 3 main objectives that I'm going to cover today. I'm going to provide an overview of the transition period for dairy cows, and I'm going to make sure this is not confused with transitioning from conventional to organic farm. And in dairy production medicine, and we called transition cow management or transition period, when cow move from one stage, late pregnancy, go through parturition and initiate lactation. That is the transition period. And I'm going to define the transition period because that is what determines and much of the management during this transition period is what will determine how strong the immune system of the cow will be and whether or not the cow will develop some of the disease. So identify some risk factors that affect the specific negative energy balance and calcium balance pre and postpartum, and provide tools to assess this transition cow management and the prevalence of specific metabolic diseases. At the end, I do have a case study, so we will go through this, and perhaps during the questioning, or you can ask questions as I go through an approach for problem solving, transition cow disease in organic dairy herds. So transition period, and basically here is what we have all the questions: the what, how, when, and why. So moving cows in a cow life, you know, once we have the cow dry at the end of lactation, so the cow will be in that dry pen for about 60 days, and then cow has to go through calving and she will initiate lactation. So how cow goes through this period of time will determine how she performs in early lactation, the reproductive performance, and the overall performance. So some of those hypocalcemic cows or low calcium level cow will have one of the risk factors for developing uterine diseases like retained fetal membrane, ometritis, and also affect the immune system and cows whether or not they will develop incident of mastitis. So calving is one of the big challenge. You know, once the cow is pregnant and she goes through the dry off process, she will have to go through calving to initiate lactation. So we will talk about, much of my presentation will be around this transition period. Before I go on with some of the information on transition management, I just want to share with you some of the prevalence of calving-related events and in conventional and organic dairy herds. So much of my work is done on transition management, and for both, for conventional and organic dairy herds. So there you can see there from milk fever, pyometra, pneumonia, dystocia, stillbirth, lameness, ketosis, pregnancy losses, and go on to the last bar is, you know, those healthy cows. So the green bars represent the cows that come from organic farms, and the orange represent bars that come from conventional farms. So there is not much difference and whether or not cows do get sick in this particular, under these different systems. And so I will emphasize a lot on metabolic disease and uterine disease because that is a reflection of how we do manage these cows and also how the immune system in these particular cows performs. So we do have established goals for all these number of diseases. And here is, I have one of the goals for stillbirth. Right? The way that we define the stillbirth is those calves that are born dead or die within 24 hours after calving. So these are coming from normal gestation length cows. So, and we know that we can achieve this in either conventional organic or organic farms. And either it's a Jersey farm or it's a Holstein cow. So these are important parameters to know, because when we do this CSI and start troubleshooting particular conditions or disease, it's important to know a benchmark value to where we should be in a particular area. So as you can, as I go through, I will mention a few benchmarks for a number of disease or conditions. So these are data from DHI, and it's about 8,211 farms. That include also organic and conventional. Most of them are just conventional farms. And the way that I look performance in a farm, either this is a health event, or this is somatic cell count, or this is productivity, milk yield, and I look, their reproductive performance. And if cows do get pregnant, that tells me a lot on how they manage all this transition period from late gestation, calving, early lactation, and we know that about 50 to 60 days we are going to start breeding back these cows and they will get pregnant. So in order to get pregnant a cow, they had to have very good uterine environment. So, and what I do here is the representation, number of farms in the x-axis, and the y-axis is just the 21-day pregnancy rate. Well, we can go through if anybody wants to know more about this, what I mean by the 21-day pregnancy rate. And but what I look there is just variation in management, because this is what dictates much of the performance. This is just not a particular protocol or a particular facility or system what will dictate performance. And so what I did is I looked the bottom 10%, and the weighted average for the pregnancy rate is 8%. And I compare that one with the top 10% of the farms, right? And their weighted average for pregnancy rate is 26%. So when I look this particular population of farms, and I try to understand their management, how they feed cows, how they manage cows, their facility, whether conventional, organic, and the prevalence of diseases and the protocol that they use to breed cows, and most of variation, more than 73% of variation in pregnancy rate is due to management and environment. So I will talk a big deal during my presentation about management. And when I refer to environment, I mean, cows that are being housed here in Ohio versus cows that are housed in Florida. So a different environment that require, depending on the season, sometimes a different management. So, but much of this variation is due to management. So how we manage cow will dictate the performance. So even these 425 farms there that are 20% pregnancy rate, they have very wide management practices, but yet they do have similar pregnancy rate. So I'll share with you more detail as I go through on this, variation in management practice. So one of the questions that I always look when I do this farm audit or risk assessment, right, is just going through a farm production system, trying to identify risk factors that is affecting performance, right? So one of the questions I ask is why cows are leaving the farm. So, and these are just from the USDA data. So farms leave very basic 4 reasons: mastitis, lameness, reproductive problems, or low production. Right? But in the cow life, once a cow heifer is pregnant, calving is the main challenge. And how we manage that will have implication in the subsequent lactation and reproductive performance. So how much is the economic of transition cow management, right? And the way that we look at the economics and is we look how many cows we are losing, or they had to be removed from the production system because either they are getting sick or they develop this chronic event within 60 days in milk. So here are 2 different distinct and different productions farms. One that has 12% what we call culling rate, so cows that are leaving the farm versus farms that has 6%. Regardless of how we estimate this number, so it costs money. So for a farm, this is just simulated for a 1,000 cow farm, but it could be simulated just for 100 cows or 100 cows. So it's either, for a 100 cow farm is $8,000. And these will depend very heavily, this number, on a very simple variable. Either how much is our replacement cost, how much are we getting paid for milk, right? And replacement cost dictate a lot the difference, on the economics. But at the end of the day, and how we manage these cows, it costs money. And some of this is the same as how much we spend when the cow is sick. So I go through now the transition period, right? So we will review this, how the cow goes through the dry off period, how she approaches parturition, how she goes through parturition and early lactation. There is a number of pre-fresh, what we call pre-fresh risk factors. So a number of management or risk factors that will dictate how cows do either at calving or early on in lactation. So many of the conditions, like I shared the picture there that has uterine disease, vaginal discharge or uterine discharge, some of those conditions come from the pre-fresh pen. So how we manage of what we see early lactation, the root of the problem, it could be in our pre-fresh management. And when I go through this farm audit, we will use some of this information to close the loop. So to create a record-keeping system and either to collect clinical and behavioral metrics, and I share with you what I mean by that, to really do prevention medicine. Because if you really manage, especially, and I will emphasize our pre-fresh management, pre-fresh diet, either for cows or heifer, how important is that for a cow, right? And also some of the challenges for all these cows that we have now in any farms. So to answer one of the questions, what is the transition period, right? And here is a lot of debate, if you will. So, but in general, 3 weeks prior and 3 weeks after calving. So here is what we call the transition period. And definitely the cow at dry off, she will have to go through one of the transitions, that is the involution of the mammary tissue. So the cow will stop producing milk, will go through the involution of the mammary, and 60 days later after that, she will go through calving, and a few days before calving, mammary will start, the mammary tissue start producing again, and first, colostrum and then milk. So all these different transitions, either hormonal, tissue, and all that has, created massive challenge for the cow. And specifically when the cow goes through negative energy or calcium balance, because a number of those particular aspects will dictate, the prevalence of some of those health events or conditions that we see early on in lactation. So keep this in mind, and this transition period, because this is what I use later on when I visit this farm to do a specific sampling in cows, or looking for facility designs, or looking for protocols, or looking for environment, just trying to go through from dry off to early lactation, right? And we will see later on those sampling period what I look for and why is that important. So this is the relationship between milk production and body weight. So in general, a typical herd lactation, and depending on milk production on the farm. But anyway, about 60 days, the cow will have a peak of production. Immediately after calving, a cow will produce for about 24 hours, colostrum, and then colostrum will start going off from the udder, and the cow will start producing, milk. So right after that, after calving, the cow, to compensate for energy and nutrient demand to produce milk, the cow will lose body weight. And usually cow will lose fat, right, just to compensate for the energy demand. So how we manage early on and the pre-fresh, right? At the end of lactation, the cow will go through the dry-off period, but how we manage the early lactation and the green box there, that is where we see most of the problem. And most of what farmers see is either retained fetal membrane mastitis and uterine disease. Perhaps mastitis is one of the most recognized events. But most of these disease has one common thing, that is the immune system. So depending on how the immune system is, that will dictate, the prevalence of those conditions that we saw early on. So in any farm that I go, we have made significant genetic progress. And in the last 40 years, we have been selecting cows for production, and which is a good thing. With most of our producers will make that is the commodity, and that is how we make money, right, in this operation, by selling milk. So in a cow life, and perhaps producing colostrum is one of the biggest challenges. And here is an example of a cow that produces about 20 pounds of colostrum. And how much is the challenge for her to just produce that much, right? She will need about 11 megacal of energy, about 140 grams of protein, and 20 grams of calcium. So perhaps calcium here, this is just only for 20 pounds of colostrum, right? 25 grams of calcium is a massive challenge for this cow. So in my next slide, I give you just, for a mature cow, this is a multipar cow that produces 40 pounds of colostrum within the first 24 hours after calving. So the analysis there, in that analysis of calcium colostrum component, you can see there in that square red box there, and that for that particular calcium analysis, every liter or every 2 pounds of colostrum, there is 4.7 grams of calcium. So a cow that produces 40 pounds of colostrum, the first 24 hours after calving, she will need 94 grams of calcium. So this is about 10 to 15 or even higher, than what the cow has in the blood, in the whole system. So the cow will have about 4 grams. So she will need to get most of the calcium early on in lactation from the bone, right? She will need to mobilize calcium to be able to cover the demand from the udder. And well, we know that dry matter intake in transition cow is compromised, right? As the cow approach calving, dry matter intake will go down, right? So you got a 60 or a 70 pound calf inside, so there is a physical constraint that will reduce dry matter intake, and some hormonal also constraints there. So, and after calving, the cow will recover dry matter intake, and as the cow recovers dry matter intake, she can provide as much as the udder need. So that period of time that I mentioned there in that, square box, those, days before calving and after calving, this is the crucial period. This is the crucial period because this is when how we manage on those little risk factors that affect dry matter intake, we have a profound effect in the cow health, right? So there is one of the major things that we are going to talk in this presentation is how can we improve dry matter intake for these cows, especially around the time of parturition. So not only the dry matter intake is affected, the cow has to adapt, from a cow ration, a dry cow ration prior to calving, to a complete, for some farm, a complete different ration to the fresh cow rations. So the rumen has to recover dry matter intake and adjust the flora there. So there is a few days there that the cow will face a negative energy balance, right? So how soon or how quick she recovers from calving, that will dictate, all these negative balance that the cow has to face. So another important component for my presentation is this serum calcium, within 48 hours after calving. I did mention to you that the cow needs this massive amount of calcium, right? And on top of that, the cow will go twice a day to the parlor or 3 times depending on the farm management. And so every day that you milk cow, you are removing calcium from the system. And the cow has to get that calcium from the system somewhere. Either it's from bone storage or from nutrients, right, from the fresh cow diet. But we know that the fresh cows has dry matter intake. So here is just in general some information within 48 hours after calving, right, by lactation numbers, right, from 1 lactation, those are the heifers, all the way to lactation 6. And on the x-axis, this is the calcium level, right? This is a millimolar, but it could be a milligram by deciliter, right? So the gray box, the first one on top, is just showing you the normal level, right? Each one of the dots here represent 1 cow, right? So in general, heifers, we are not going to have clinical cases in general. In general, heifers is not a big problem for clinical. When I say clinical, the milk fever. The cow is down, they're showing the clinical signs. She has severe hypocalcemia, so therefore she cannot stand up, right? And but as the cow age, and as the cow starts producing more milk, right, in each lactation, she also has a different demand for calcium, and that is also shown in the prevalence of these hypocalcemic cows. So as the cow age, as you can see, 4, 6 to 10%, clinical cases. And there is, between the normal and the clinical, there is one that what we call the subclinical. So the immune system is compromised, but cows do not show the clinical sign. We are not able to see that the cow is down or has a specific clinical condition that we can tell that is a hypocalcemic cow. But we do know that a number of those subclinical cows will get sick or develop some of the uterine diseases or mastitis. So we know that the immune system is compromised. And in general, for every cow that we see on the farm that is down with milk fever, we are going to have about 25 cows subclinical. The subclinical group of cows is our biggest problem, right? Because you cannot tell that the cow is sick or anything because she will not show, but she will have a very high probability of getting sick. And then perhaps what you see there is cow developing these clinical signs, develop mastitis, develop uterine disease, and so that is a cow that may have a compromised immune system. We will see more information about that. So we know that cows early on in lactation, right? Here is an study that they measure BHBAs. So these are basically just 2 markers or parameter, if you will, to measure the negative or assess the negative energy balance in a cow. And here we have 2 groups of cows. Cow that has normal calcium level at the time of calving, and cow that has they were subclinical hypocalcemia. So they were in the group that I showed you before. So as you can see, cows that has subclinical hypocalcemia, they both has high BHBA, right? They are very likely to develop ketosis and high NIFAS. So these are things that we measure when we do this farm audit. and I go through the fund. This is just telling me how profound or how deep is the negative energy balance. And we cross that reference with some of the calcium balance. Because we know that the best predictor for either NIFAS and VHBA, is the calcium status. So if the calcium, count with subclinical hypocalcemia, do have elevated NIFA and VHBA, at least for the first 7 days postpartum, right? And as you remember the first graph that I mentioned to you, those cows were the one that has compromised dry matter intake. So the cow in a way do not have a control, how much milk she can produce. So if the udder has a specific nutrient demand, she will provide at expense of getting sick herself, right? So we know that the cow is early on in lactation in negative energy balance, and one of the parameters is measuring these two markers, and including calcium, and we know that these hypocalcemic cows, they do affect the immune system, right? So early on, here is just a study that measures days postpartum. The proportion of neutrophil. Neutrophil are just the cells responsible, for control of fighting infections in a cow. So cows that has normal calcemia versus cows that has subclinical hypocalcemia. So we know that there is an association between hypocalcemia and negative energy balance, and we know also that low calcium cows or hypocalcemic cows will have a compromised immune system, right? So we also know that most of what we call transition cow disease are because the cow goes through delivery. And here is a group of transition cow disease: dysplasia abomasum, ketosis, metritis, milk fever, pneumonia, or retained placenta, right? So just to name a few, most of these conditions, there will be most of these disease, within, the 20 or 30 days in milk. And then you have those mastitis. A number of cases will be early on in lactation, and some of them will be more like the 60, 80, or 150 days in milk, right? But a number of these conditions, is what will prone the system for each individual cows, whether or not they develop a particular disease. So we also know that most of these diseases are associated with negative nutrient, like I mentioned to you before, and calcium balance. So basically what you see, you're going to see the clinical signs. You're going to walk the pens or walk your cows either in a confinement system. It might be during the winter for some of the organic farms, or just walking the pasture. And you may see some of those vaginal discharge. So where that problem come from. So a number of those cases, they come from how we manage cows early on in lactation, or how we manage cows prior to calving. So because that will dictate how deep is the negative energy balance and how is the prevalence of hypocalcemia. And we know that hypocalcemic cows will have a compromised immune system. So the basic physiological functions to avoid transition cow disease, this is just at the practical level at the farm, right? So it all depends on dry matter intake and the adaptation of the rumen to lactation diet. So dry matter intake is crucial. I did show to you early on, the cow will have some limitation, physiological limitation on dry matter intake, especially as they approach parturition. And then after parturition, the cow will need to expand, stretch back the rumen, recover from parturition, and change the flora in the rumen, and provide the nutrients to the mammary tissue, the udder. And maintenance of normal calcemia, it is very crucial for immune function and maintenance of a strong immune system. So these three things is that will determine the prevalence of both metabolic and infectious diseases. And so, in a number of things that I'm going to go through now are associated with this dry matter intake and some of the risk factors that may or may not affect dry matter intakes, and also the normal calcemia, because we know that if we compromise it, we are going to have problem with the immune system. And if we have problem with the immune system, you are going to have problem with disease, right? Either it's a mastitis or it's a uterine disease like metritis. So when I go through the farm or any production system, we do the risk factor for daily production system. So here are the five components. So you're going to have a nutrition, and in your nutrition management, you're going to have all the ingredients. What basically this is what the cow eats and how I offer this to the cow through their, production cycle, either when she's dry and also early on in lactation and later in lactation, right? So then you're going to have your animals. Every farm has different, or it might be the same breed, Holstein or Jersey cows, right? You're going to have facilities and equipment. That is how you are going to manage all those animals and offer the nutrition. And then you're going to have the environment, right? Environment could be different within the same region or the same country, being in Florida or being here in the upper Midwest, and including in the same state, within the same state, how my facility will also dictate. And one of the examples of environment, how often do I clean my fresh pen or the pre-fresh pen, right? But there is one factor that combine or bring all this together, that is people. Right? People will dictate, the management on the farm. And this is what I call the fingerprint of transition management program. Right? And I try to go through, because every farm is unique, and how we manage the combination of the environment, the combination of facility, the combination of animals, and our nutrition program will dictate, the three main physiological factors: dry matter intake, calcium balance, right, and what I showed you before, and the immune system, right? So when I do this on-farm risk assessment, and I share some information in the case study. So I look these five components, right? Facilities and equipment, and it could be just for lactating cows, and include also dry cows, or also it could include, some of the lactating dry cows and calves. The environment, especially, are the pasture, how big are the pasture, the parlor, access to the parlor, water, and animals, nutrition and their management program, and people. And what I'm trying to determine when I do this farm assessment is the drop in dry matter intake and negative energy and calcium balance. And I share now, when I walk through this management program, I'm looking at for risk factors that impact dry matter intake. And then usually it's going to be either pre-fresh or, when the cow is fresh. And then you can use some of these cow side tests to assess the negative and calcium balance, because I will tell you in a more or less how they will perform during lactation. So here is some of the tools that we use to monitor calcium balance. This is just one example of a cow side test, and this is just you collect the blood sample from the cow 48 hours after parturition, and then you measure. And you measure a number of parameters. Basically, you measure all these 8 parameters here. And basically what you are looking at here is our calcium level, right? And I use this calcium level just to see whether or not the cow has hypocalcemia, either clinical or subclinical hypocalcemia. You also can measure total calcium, either way. It's ionized calcium or total calcium. So your veterinarian very likely will do some assessment on the cows and make decision based on these parameters. Another thing that we use to monitor negative energy balance is using these ketone strips, right? So either you can do pre-fresh and or fresh cows, and you monitor this, and you start looking at their accumulation of these ketone bodies. That will tell you how much fat the cow is basically burning and using and mobilizing, and that will tell you whether or not the cow has developed ketosis, right? And we use a cut point for this. More than 1 millimolar, and more than 1 millimolar is either subclinical, and more than 1.2 or 1.4 clinical ketosis. But what I'm looking at, and you will see in the case study, is either one of, either the proportion of cows that are either clinical or subclinical, because that will tell me an idea about the immune system for this group of cows, the population of cows that you are managing. So here are some parameters and reference values, right? So, and I give you a number of parameters here. So the first two parameters, the BHBA and NIFA, those are referred for just to assess the negative energy balance, right? And then there is a number of values there, right? So 10 milligram by deciliter is the same as this 1 millimolar, right? So these are just equal unit. And some of these reference values also has an alarm level. And I'm going to explain at the end of this presentation, here is the alarm level. So what I'm looking at for this particular, for example, BHBA has an alarm level of more than 15%. Okay, what that mean more than 15%? So if I'm sampling 24 animals, right? So more than 15% is just 3 or 4 animals are, they have, greater concentration than, 10 milligram by deciliter. So if I found 3 or 4 animals in a group of 25, then, I may have one of these associate problems, either ketosis, very likely I may experience some of my cows, metritis, or DA. So some of the cows that we sample, the group of cows at risk is just within, cows that are 5 to 20 days. So, and it goes down here, and you are not going to use urine pH. We only use urine pH for those, especially in conventional farms, that they use anionic salt, and just to lower the urine pH, in the 20 days prior to calving, as a way to control hypocalcemia. And here you have the calcium, blood calcium. 8 milligrams by deciliter is the same as 2 millimole. So those are same unit. And so then I broke it down these two for calcium and multiple cows, one alarm level, and one is more than 15%, and more than 1% for heifers. So you should not have a problem in heifers. If you do have great prevalence in heifers, very likely heifers are losing weight prior to calving. Very common that they develop hypocalcemia because they are losing body weight prior to calving. And the best time to measure blood calcium is around 48 hours, between 24 to 48 hours postpartum. It's very important when you collect these samples, because I will tell you the prevalence. Do I have less or more? So for you to get a clear idea, the calcium status, so the cow has to be in the milking routine, right? And about 48 hours is when it's going to give you a good reading about the prevalence of this condition in your cow. If you go too early in calving, let's say that you measure this about 2 hours after parturition, probably the prevalence of hypocalcemia is much lower, right? So we usually go about 48 hours after parturition and measure this calcium level. So here you have number of parameters with some benchmark, an alarm level, clarification for the alarm level, and some of the associated conditions that you may have, right? We also use, when I do this farm audit, I just want to know the cow resting time, right? So here is, this is just to show the effect of this dose at calving on cow activity. And we use perometers. We do have specific perometers that we place in cows that measure activity in cows. And it measures, what cows do on a regular day on a farm. And then basically, it's a learning tool because you can see the cow reaction to facility, the cow reaction to management, even prior and after calving. So this is an example of 2 cows, right? 2 cows within the same management and under the same farm, right? And these are 2 multiple cows. One has a dystocia at calving, right? And one was a normal delivery. And you can see after calving, the cow stayed for a few hours there. And after a few hours, so they process the cow, they remove colostrum, and she get into the milking routine. And you can see this arrow, they show each one of the 3 milking a day, right? So the most important that I learned using this is because this is a good estimation of dry matter intake, right? So, for example, for the one on top, you can see that this cow with severe dystocia, she don't move. The only time that she moves, here, the motion index, this parameter has a motion index. The motion index is a combination of walking, standing, the number of laying bout, and the number of minutes that the cow is, laying or lying. The cow is just resting. Right, so that will give you the combination of how much she moves and during the day. So this particular cow, between each milking, she does not move much. So, and if she doesn't move, it's an indication that she's also not eating or drinking, right? So, and versus the normal cow, and you can see here the normal cow, even between each one of the milking, she socialize and move and go to the feed bank or walk in the pasture, and so this is a clear indication for dry matter intake. And we use more and more this behavior of the cow to predict, how strong is the immune system. And we do have a specific bench values for our cows. So here is what we call the time budget, right? How many hours a day, and behavior of lactating daily cows. So, and usually this is what cows do on any farm. So the cow is either going to be resting or laying. She's going to spend some time eating, right? And this is why it's important, dry matter intake. Standing and walking, right? And also she's going to spend time in the holding pen or on the milking parlor, right? So, but a combination, if you affect one of these, right? So what we look here is, you have a range of value. These are data that we have been collecting and some other researchers has been collecting for transition cows. So here is the ranges. So we all pay attention to this value. For example, this is a value that early on in lactation, specific the first 2 weeks after lactation, I look for this value. So cows should be resting about 12 hours a day, right? If you compromise these 12 hours a day, very likely you are going to compromise one of them. And usually in a cow life, the one that she's going to compromise is eating. Because milking, she has to go. You are going to milk the cow twice a day or 3 times a day. So, and if you compromise eating, the first one is you are going to have low dry matter intake. And if you have low dry matter intake early on in lactation, you are going to have a more severe negative energy balance, meaning that the cow has to mobilize more fat to compensate the nutrient demand from the mammary tissue. And we know that as the cow gets more and more in this negative energy balance, she will develop and compromise, some of the immune function. And this is perhaps why you see cows develop mastitis. So this is one of our benchmark value, the 12 hours a day. Every time that I go and I see these farms that are below 8 hours a day, especially early on in lactation, and then I compare with those negative energy balance parameters like BHBAs or NIFA and calcium balance. So this is a clear indication, how we manage these cows. So a particular group that are very sensitive, early on in lactation, but also in the close-up prior to calving, right? Because you can have cows losing body weight, and in general, and when you dry off the cow, body condition should not change, right? Either cow should not gain or should not lose body weight, from dry off to parturition. Losing body weight, especially in heifer, is very challenging. So you will have a lot of metabolic, especially uterine disease problem early on in lactation. Some of the potential problems that affect this time budget, especially resting, right? Stocking density, cows per feed bank space, or how is our feed bank and how we offer, how many times a day we offer food. Especially for those people grazing, the distance to the pasture, how much the effort the cow has to walk just to get enough dry matter intake to cover the nutrient demand, and feed bank management. Milking time is something that I pay more and more attention now, especially early on in lactation. And farms that milk twice a day, farms that milk 3 times a day, and farms that milk 4 times a day, right? So the more milking time, especially those the first 2 weeks after lactation, will have an impact. Premipar of cows, so heifers that go for the first time during delivery, they will show, because we know when we use this perometer and we look their motion index, right? Premipar of cows has a very hard time adjusting, especially the first 2 or 3 days, even 5 days after parturition. So it's a very painful process for them. And not as much as for multipar of cows, but for premipar of cows, they do have a really hard time adjusting. And painful the process itself for parturition, and they need to recover intake quickly, so just to keep up with the nutrient demand. And commingling primiparos and multiparos cows, they do have some impact on this time budget, especially primiparos cows and people, basically how we manage these cows. So if you compromise some of these resting time that I look, some of the associated events, you're going to end up with a problem with dry matter intake, lameness, hypocalcemia, and things that we already talked about. So low dry matter intake is the direct consequence when the time budget of lactating baby cows, especially the first 30 days in milk, is affected, right? So this is one of our parameters that we look. And then this is the fingerprint, because each farm is different, right? So the combination of these factors is what is going to tell you how is first the dry matter intake in cows, second the calcium status, and then you can predict and make an assessment about the immune function of these cows. So I will touch base a little bit now on people, and specific how important it is to have SOPs. Those are the standard operating procedures for transition management. And when I talk about these operating procedures, I talk about from the TMR, if you're using TMR, it doesn't matter if you got 50 cows or if you got 200 cows or 500 or more cows. So SOP for calving management, SOP for our fresh cows. So basically the SOP is what to look for and why is that important, right? Our feed bank management and our pallor and milking routine management, right? So, and farmers should have these SOPs established, should have these SOPs available on the farm. This is very, very important, because when I do this farm audit, we also look for this. We also look whether or not those SOPs are in place, and because that tells us a lot when we put all together. The SOPs, the negative energy balance, calcium balance, and resting time. Right? So I just want to share this study, and I really like this study. This is a very basic study that they were looking for variation, right, in production in cows. So there was 47 farms that received the same feed ration. So it's a company that provide, they mix all the ingredients every day, and they deliver to these 47 farms every day. All these 47 farms have similar genetic base, so they have very similar cows. But there was a difference in production, right, in meat production, from 40 pounds to almost, 65, 68 pounds, right? So a major difference, even though they do receive same exact ration. So they basically they know that the ration was not a problem, so they were looking for non-dietary factors that affected, those management factors that is affecting meat production, right? So what they noticed there, that there was a major difference in dry matter intake. And this is perhaps one of the main points that I really want to leave clear. If you compromise dry matter intake, we know by physiology cow will have compromised dry matter intake as she approached parturition, because she got a big calf inside the belly, right? And so there is a major difference, almost 16 pound difference, right, in dry matter intake, and that explains a lot, production. So also age, the age of first calving. So all the heifers have lower production. They also observed that, either whether there was or no, feed refusal, in that feedback. If there was feed refusal, they produce more milk, right? The overstocking, right? The number of free stalls, they were using free stall for this particular study. So all cows were housed, in free stall barn. So every time that they go more than one stall per cow, they have always, reduced production. Feed availability, especially push-up, whether or not they push up in the feed bank, if they did push versus farms that did not push, so they have 4 kilos cow a day. So this is very, very important, because this is what we are going to do now in the case study. I'll show you, because these 5 factors here, these 5, dry matter intake, age, feed refusal, stocking density, and push-up, that explains 50% of variation in milk yield that they cannot be attributed to the diet. And as I showed you earlier, that I shared with you similar to reproductive performance. In our study, we found that most of variation in reproductive performance is due to management and environment. So a very similar study that point out why dry matter intake is so important, not only to milk production, but also for, the immune system in cows. So when we talk about transition management, right, and I use this one just to put everything in perspective, right? This transition management, it kind of, everything is interconnected, right? So how we manage one area of the production system will do have an impact on other areas of the production system. So everything is interconnected and organized in a way. So people here play a very critical role, because that will dictate and our prevalence, for example, of mastitis, somatic cell count in a given operation. So when we do this on-farm training, whether it's a conventional or it's an organic farm, right? So this is the model that I use for this facility, right? So basically the model starts with an established SOPs, and the first step is that you have to have an SOP on the farm so that you can build the training program upon the established SOP. It's very difficult to do a training program and a meaningful training program and see any impact on the farm without an SOP. So basically when you do these training programs, you are going to have some knowledge and skills, right? You do demonstration and you follow this loop. So you are going to have regular meetings on the farm and get feedback, reassign tasks, and look for performance and close the loop and retrain and so on and so on. So very important message that I'm going to give here is you have to have the SOPs established on the farm, and people should receive training according to the SOPs. So there is training in general is the same, but there is variation according to management. So that is why it's important that blanket training may not work. So every farm has unique SOPs according to their situation, a combination of facility design. So our training should match particular SOPs for the specific farm. So now one of the important things, because some people may manage milking cows and some others may manage baby calf, right? So there are 4 major components when we want to execute these SOPs in a given particular farm. And this is part of our farm audit, right? On Thursday, June the 26th, I will go through some of this information and share with you some example of SOPs for farm. So when you have an SOP, you establish the operating procedure either for fresh cow, for calving management, for TMR or mixer, and or health program. So you do the training to improve 2 things: knowledge and skills. Without that, you cannot build up any program. But and this is basically you can accomplish that by, or either is you do training with producers, or it's a discussion group with a group of producers, and then there has to be 2 more components that are very important for these SOPs. That is attitude and performance, right? So, and the attitude and performance, this is just associated with management and the working environment, right? So everything needs to be in place. You have to have the SOP, you need to know and how to do it, and then you have to have the attitude to do the job and to perform, right? So this is one of our components for our farm audit. So here is the risk assessment, and I just went through some of the basic on transition management, some of the basic on the 5 components, the animals, facilities and equipment, nutrition management. I will not cover a specific, and this is not meant to cover nutrition management and how to formulate a ration for a cow. But I cannot emphasize how important it is. You have to have a sound diet, either for pre-fresh or fresh cows, as well as for fresh cows. And we went over some of the risk factors that impact dry matter intake, and that impact the resting time. And we know that resting time affects dry matter intake. And if we do have a problem early on in lactation with dry matter intake, we are going to have a problem with negative energy balance, and very likely we are going to have compromised hypocalcemia, right, or compromised calcium status. And the combination of those events will dictate either the prevalence of nephritis or the prevalence of mastitis and somatic cell count that you have on the farm. So when I do this risk assessment, so I'll pick some point and parameters that we are going to measure, right? So and body condition score is 1, right? It's very important that they get an idea how, the body condition of cows are dry off, right? And And then we will just pick specific times during the process, and we start measuring specific activities. And some of the farm, they do have all calving, throughout the year, and some other farms are more seasonal calving, right? So depending on the management on the farm is when we go to this operation and we look for these parameters, and we use these parameters just to build up our recommendations for the farm. So on day -7, I can, using our parameters, just get an idea about resting time for these pre-fresh cows, their negative energy balance. This is just a blood sample that you collect from cows and get the BHVAs on IFA, and also body condition score. So you have 2 body condition, now 1 a dry off, 1 7 days prior to calving, and we also have collect another blood sample 48 hours after calving and get a body condition score of the cows, right? And you are going to have an idea about stillbirth, right? How many calves are born dead or die within 24 hours. Retained fetal membranes, the way that we define retained fetal membranes, those, just the membrane hanging out of the vagina for more than 24 hours, right? Cows that has more than 24 hours, we call that cow a retained fetal membrane. So more or less, you collect, you got the prevalence of diseases there, and the stillbirth, and then we know the body condition score, we know the calcium status, and we know the negative energy balance. And on day, it could be here ±3 days. On day 7, we also measure and monitor resting time for these lactating cows, their negative energy balance, body condition score, and the prevalence of uterine diseases. And so this is just to narrow down to a specific, a few days, especially those 2 weeks after calving, right? The week before calving, dry off. So with that information is what we use this critical point to develop our recommendations. So we know that many of the risk factors, right, come from the pre-fresh pen. So how we manage these cows will dictate the performance early on in lactation, either in our pre-fresh pen or early on in lactation. The critical point for the cow are those 2 weeks after lactation. So we need to maximize resting time so the cow can maximize dry matter intake. So the way that usually cows cannot talk, so the way we communicate with them, we provide plenty of resting time so they can recover from parturition and recover dry matter intake as quick as possible, because that will dictate how deep is the negative energy balance and also calcium balance. And if we have problems with the negative energy balance and calcium balance, we are going to have compromised immune system. And this is when you see early on in lactation, or when you look at your somatic cell count, either monthly or weekly, how you are going to manage either your mastitis, your somatic cell count, or uterine disease. That rely very heavily on the immune system. So, and with that information is what we use to go through when we do this on-farm audit. So now I'll share with you a few pictures that I take over the years, either in conventional or organic farms. And here is a classic, why is a pre-fresh diet not working, right? And this is what I mean when you impact dry matter intake, right? This is a management practices that they really drop the dry matter intake in cows, and it compromises their negative energy balance and their calcium balance, and either early on in lactation or prior to parturition. This is a major problem for the cow, and a major component that explains why cows do get sick, right? So another component, and not only just for cow but also for calf, right? And sometimes you get this request for information and say, we lost 20% of the female calf due to pneumonia. Should I use a different meal replacer? Well, here the most important aspect is just to know what is normal for calf, right? Changing perhaps for this particular environment, changing a meal replacer will not fix the management, right? The management of keeping those calves in a clean and dry environment, right? That is the key to build up the immune system and health. And so before I go on with this transition period, right? So managing this nutrient and calcium balance is key for immune function, right? Especially dry matter intake, calcium balance, and that will dictate, how strong the immune system is, and the strongest immune system, the lower, the prevalence of diseases, especially transition, what we call transition disease or calving-related diseases on a farm. So here is the case study, and I'm using a large operation, and this is very similar for a small farm. It could be very similar, and perhaps the number of cows that you are going to be sampling is going to be different. But the approach is very similar, right? So in this case study, I just want to walk very briefly through, and then if you got more questions, just to see how we go through this system and start looking for risk factors that are impacting the performance in the cow, and what are those areas that I should improve to get better my dry matter intake for these cows and improve the immune system. So here are some relevant information for this particular situation, and I'll show you in my next slide, the field situation. So basically, the computer records show that conception to first service was lower than second or greater service, right? So there was a problem in general under normal conditions. Cows should have the highest conception to first service compared to the second, third, and subsequent service, right? So the most fertile service is the first one, right? When you see lower conception to the first one versus the other one, there is a problem. So here is some farm information specific for this operation, and again, this could be a small farm or it could be a large operation. I just try to put all the information together, just you see how we look at this transition management and the negative energy balance, calcium balance, and the immune system, what those factors are that is impacting my dry matter intake, right? And so they were housing in freestall barns, and they used 60 days as my voluntary waiting periods. So cows were, this is unique, because cows were milked four eggs 4 times a day for the first 20 days in milk. And after the 20 days in milk, they milk 3 eggs, right? So this is one of the big risk factors. When you send the cow 3 times a day to the parlor, right, you are compromising very likely resting time. And if you compromise resting time, you are going to compromise dry matter intake, and especially early on in lactation. And those 2 weeks after lactation are very critical for a cow. The rations, as far as the formulation, and as far as there was no problem, either for pre-fresh or fresh cows. There was some issues with body condition score that I'm going to share with you now, and some TMR delivery. So how many hours there is feed available for cows. So the cow has 24 hours. So how many hours during those 24 the cow has feed available so she can eat. And there was some issues with the stocking density, and there in the pre-fresh, both in the pre-fresh pen and fresh pen. And we do measure some of our prevalence of, in this particular farm audit, we did measure endometritis. And so basically we just went on day 26 after calving, and we score cows their vaginal discharge. And so I was 31% of the cows that did have some uterine problems. So there was no electronic records on metritis, stillbirth, retained placenta, or calving protocol. There was nothing available for us to look over. And all cows were subject to they used the same reproductive program and management. And heifers were moved about 45 days prior to calving to the farm. So the cow were about 45 days prior to parturition, and then when the cow is in parturition, they would move to the fresh pen, and the milking routine goes on, right? 4 eggs for 20 days, and then 3 eggs, 3 times a day. The specific request from the owner is just to, they wanted to improve reproductive performance to first service. So here is the conception. This is just data, right, from the computer. Specific software, and it's just Dailycom 305. And but regardless of the software, here is the conception. So the overall 21-day pregnancy rate was 19%. And as you can see by service number, 28% first service, and after the second, third, fourth, and fifth service, about 35–36% conception. So clearly there was 7 points lower for first service. And also you have some of the losses there. So these are just abortion, right? And as you can see for the first 3 services and the overall. So there was about 20% losses. The way that we compute losses, and you look the total abortion here and the total number of pregnancies. So this number divided by the total number of pregnancies, and 713 for the overall divided this number of pregnant cows. This is about 20% of the losses. So for every service, the same pattern, right? The same, about 19 to 20% pregnancy losses. So this was the situation early on during the farm visit. So here is the body condition score. So you shall walk the pen, and we will do this on Thursday on real, looking at the body condition using the 5-point scale, and you score cows and far off right after the dry off, as soon as they approach parturition, and then the fresh pen. So I give you an idea, right? I give you the average. Here is the distribution. So for the far off and the closer pen, as you can see, very similar. So cows do not change much in body condition score. And perhaps in the closer pen cows, most of the cows are more fat, and but the average is about 3.754, and the range from 3 to 5, right? So this is what I look. I look the average, and I look how wide is my range of cows. So the thinner cows and the fat cows. So you can have here, an idea of this population of cows. And then early on in lactation. So early on in lactation, usually these are cows that are about 20 days in milk, right? And you can see cows that have 2.5 in lactation, and even fat cows, goes to 5. The average perhaps is 2, 3 here, the average, with a range from 2.5 all the way up to 5. So we also get some profile. This is just a subset of cows that we milk, and we collect blood sample, and we measure. If you remember early on in my presentation, I measured how to measure these ketone values. What we do is the DHBA. We measure this using a specific device that you can use it on the farm, and we look for farms that are graded. They have greater than 1 millimoles per liter, right? So for this particular farm, I have 10, 2, 4, 6, so 9, 10 cows here, and there is 4 out of 9 that has more than 1.1 millimole per liter. So this is, this is a much larger data, and they're days in milk when we collect the blood sample, right? How many liters or pounds. So if you want to multiply, if you want to get pound, you need to multiply this number by 2 and 2.2, and so you can have an idea about milk, how much milk they were producing. You know how many days in milk, and you know the negative energy balance here, and their body condition score, right? So this is information that I collect when I walk through the farm and I try to get an idea for this cow. But anyway, about 40% of the cow with ketosis, and I give some previous values to you, some parameters. You know, if we have more than 15%, this is an alarm. So this is a problem. So when I measure calcium at 48 hours, so 48 hours we get, you know, after parturition and collect the blood sample from the cow, and we measure total calcium, right? Total calcium, and it was 35%, either clinical or subclinical cows. So if they were below 8 milligram by deciliter, we call the cow either, you know, below 8, either clinical or subclinical, right? About 25% of the cows, we check those cows on day 8, 6, 8, and 10, and this is about 25% prevalence of metritis. And I did measure the resting time for this. I just went to the parlor, I placed this perometer in the leg for a few days, for about 5 days, and then fresh cows, they are about 20 days in milk, and they, on average, for these cows, were 8.2 hours a day, right? So we know that we have a problem with resting, you know. We know that has some issues with the TMR delivery, so empty bank space. We know high prevalence of metritis. We know that we have hypocalcemia and negative energy balance. And we know that hypocalcemia and negative energy balance are associated with the immune system. So especially if we have hypocalcemic cows, we are going to have a compromised immune system, and that is why we see this, you know, high prevalence of metritis. Right? So what we do with this operation, what we do in this particular situation, right? One of the biggest, you really need to start somewhere, you know, and making some corrections. So stocking density is one of the biggest issues. So I show you now data from fresh pen. We didn't measure for this particular farm a stocking density in the pre-fresh pen. And that might be associated also with dry matter intake and cows losing body weight, especially heifers, right? But anyway, reducing cow density 20 days prior and after calving is very important, because this is one way that you can compromise dry matter intake and improve. If you have high stocking density, you compromise dry matter intake. If you reduce the density of those pen and offer a feed, you can maximize dry matter intake. And we reduce milking frequency to 2 eggs for the first 20 days in milk, and then all cows went to 3 eggs, right? We wanted to maximize resting time, especially early on, those 2 weeks after parturition. And comprehensive training, everybody, and we develop SOPs. So training has to go together with the SOP. So you have to establish first the SOPs on the farm, and then start developing, you know, the training. And we implement protocols to collect, you know, these doses, stillbirth, protein placenta, and metritis. So that information has to go to the computer so we can make a decision later on and monitor the program, monitor our recommendations, right? And we schedule a monthly meeting with the farm personnel to review this data and standard operating procedures, so how, whether or not they need adjustment. And there was we didn't make any change on breeding or nutrition program. And the only thing that we changed in nutrition program is the number of hours that feed should be available in the feed bank. So every time we do have a benchmark value for that, and we, out of the 24 hours, we want the cows to have feed available more than 22, right? So more than 22 hours a day, the cow should have feed available. And that was the only thing that we changed. And but as far as the nutrition, the ration formulation, that we didn't make any change. So this is how the data looks 8 months later. And this is a farm that has been doing this process for about 6 years now. And so there is an improvement, a direct cow reaction to that. So cows respond very well, they improve dry matter intake, and you can see that everything starts falling in place. So improved dry matter intake, they fix some of the negative energy balance and the calcium balance, the immune system gets better, and you start seeing less prevalence of diseases, and cows do get pregnant. Not only that they do get pregnant, but they have lower, you reduce the losses. Not only we get the cow pregnant, but we also stop these, pregnancy losses, the abortion, what we call the abortion. So 8 months later, the farm was about 22% in pregnancy rates, and it has been for the last 4-5 years about 24 to 26 in pregnancy rate. And it was very simple, just fixing this pre-fresh and fresh management and focusing on dry matter intake and calcium balance, right, to improve the immune system of these cows, especially early on in lactation. And I just want to acknowledge, and I'm going to open this now for questions, but I do want to acknowledge our collaborating dairy farms, either organic farms and conventional farms, and OFA for providing the opportunity and setting up all these webinars, and all the graduate students that has in one or other way been involved in different projects. And as Eric mentioned early on during the webinar, this is possible because of the SEAR, the North Central Region SEAR Professional Development Program that provides some of the financial support to develop this web. So with that, I will open the webinar for questions, and please feel free to ask questions. We can go back and review some of the slides.
I have a question here about whether this presentation will be archived on our website. Yes, that is correct. It will be available on the website, and you should be able to download it from that.
Whether if they want a specific information, Eric, also they can email me. So here is my email address and my phone number. So and I'll be happy to provide the information.
All right, do we have any other questions? All right, last call. All right, appreciate your time and your attendance with this first of our SARE webinars, speaking towards organic standards to organic livestock production. Please look to our website for this archived post.
So, Eric, let me just say, are you there?
Yes, sir.
And so how can I see a participant here? So I'm not sure if I see them.
Under attendees,
okay,
you hit that plus, and all our attendees will be listed right there.
Okay, let me just see. No, I don't under attendees.
All right, Gustavo, I'll go ahead and send you the downloadable database of registrants electronically.
Okay. Is there any other question? I'm not sure if they can chat or they can speak.
Oh, I got one here. Do you use an audit instrument for your assessments?
If I do use an instrument for assessment, we do use an instrument, it's just a questionnaire that we have developed, and we will use that instrument on Thursday the 26th, June the 26th, so this week. on Thursday, and that is kind of a guideline just to go through for facility designs, what to look for and why is that important. Also some reference and benchmark values for all these transition disease as well as management practices.
I have another question here. Thank you for that answer. How long does one complete assessment typically take?
And the assessment, it takes a few days, and because it really depends on what you want to answer, what are your questions to answer. And so this, and also depending on the farm size, right? And so if this is a small farm, and depending on how much information is available, maybe this is just 1 or 2 hours on the farm. You get the information, you leave the cows, and you are out. You may show up later on just to see these 7 days prior to parturition. On day 10, you just need to wait when the cows are in a specific days in milk or prior to parturition, right? And either you collect on your own or the farmer may collect for you. And in our case, we do collect or a veterinarian for the farm collect the information. And it may require a 2 or 3 visits to the farm to collect all the information so you can make some of these assessments and make some decisions and recommendations.
Well, all right. That's wait, got one more coming in. Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. Looking forward to Thursday on farm using this assessment.
Very good.
All right. Well, we're going to stop the webinar now. Thank you for your participation. For those that are registered for Thursday's on farm workshop, I'll look forward to seeing you there. Have a good day.